Ahoy! It's your old buddy Hambone, and I'm here to tell you about a new 5th edition adventure from SlowQuest. The adventure's called The Goblings, and it's on Kickstarter now. It throws your players in the role of freshly spawned goblins, hurled from their slimy goblin nest into the forest. Their quest is to scavenge, steal, craft, whatever they can do to piece together the most glorious gift for the Goblin Queen. The adventure is filled with whimsical and weird illustrations, packaged with fold-out maps, reference cards, and a bunch more cool stuff. It's live on Kickstarter now, and you can get there by heading to slowquest.com/Kickstarter or check the notes for this show. So make sure to boogie on down to Kickstarter and back the Goblings today.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He told me today he wanted to do a post-mortem on aliens, and I'm like, what's the point? Everybody dies. Stu Horvath.
It's true. It actually isn't true, but we'll get into that.
So you recently ran Chariot of the Gods, and this is a definite pivot for you because you had been running various different Cthulhu's or Mass of Nyarlathotep or just general things with monstrous names that I can't pronounce for a very long time. So what is it like breaking into a new system and then breaking into that system with some new players?
So, yeah, I fell absolutely in love. We already did the podcast on the Alien RPG. It's so simple, and it looks on paper like it's just going to build so much tension and kind of like just deliver a really interesting experience that I just had to get it to the table. And like, I don't know, I feel like I've been doing this long enough that it was not a huge pivot. It's always interesting kind of trying to get folks to read rules. I feel like I usually say that the biggest hurdle to getting a role-playing group together is to find people to play with. It's actually getting them to read the rules. It's really unfair to make your GM have to teach you the rules because they're doing everything else too.
It is tough.
Yeah, do your GM a solid and read the rules when they ask you to. It's just polite. You don't have to memorize them, but just like flip through them.
Glance at it. At least know which dice you're supposed to roll. It is a very big thing, I think, at a lot of gaming tables where you come in as a game master and you're so psyched because you have this thing and everyone tells you they're so excited to play that thing. You build up the expectation, I think, in your own brain where you're like, all right, this is it. They're going to come to the table. We're going to rock and roll right out of the gate. They're pumped. I'm pumped. Let's go. And at least 30% of them did not read the rules.
Yeah.
And I'm being generous.
Yeah, no, that's low. That's low.
Yeah, maybe 40 to 50% of them didn't read the rules. And you get to that point where you're like, oh, this first session was supposed to be like, we're going to hit the ground running. But now the first session is mostly just ordering food, bullshitting, and then like kind of learning the rules, maybe starting to run the scenario. But by that point, everyone's going home for the night.
Yeah.
So as far as rules go to learn quickly on the fly, how does this fare?
It stacks up pretty good. I did do a pretty decent job of like, not everybody was cold. Everybody had looked through the rules at least told me that they did, which made me feel good. And I did 2 groups. I did one online with my Unwinnable group, and then I did one in the clubhouse with some of our friends. And both of them, we got through a substantial amount of the game pretty quickly because it's just a simple system. You roll 6-sided dice. If you get a 6, you pass. If you don't, bad things happen. It's easy for everybody to wrap their brains around that if they've played previously. I think that initially my Unwinnable group was a little tentative because it's like, oh, the starter rule book is like, a couple hundred pages, but like A, the font is big, so like there's not a lot of information on each page. And B, like you got to trust that you kind of already know a lot of what's going on, because this is sort of like for a lot of them, it's like their second game. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's just like, oh, I got to learn all these rules. This is homework. And it's just like, no, you flip through and you're just like, oh, okay, I get this. Okay. All right. It's like picking up canasta after you've played poker. It's like, oh, well, they both use cards. I'm fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's also that thing that's going through my brain where, knowing that your Unwinnable crew, like a lot of them, this is like their second role playing experience,
Yeah.
and you whoop their asses in Cthulhu. And these are creatures that now they're coming up against that are utterly gutting them that they might not be familiar with. Whereas now they go on to Alien, and you're going to the Xenomorph, which is very widely known and very widely feared. I kind of feel like it's more of an uphill battle going to the devil that you actually know on this one.
So, yeah, that's really one of the cool things about Alien is that the foreknowledge that the rule of thumb is that, like, don't metagame, right? But, like, the best moments in Horror on the Orient Express for me were the moments where, like, the group completely paused, got out of character, realized that they were at, like, a pivotal moment in the plot and had to, like, really talk through it. And it was great. Like, everybody was just engaged and excited and nervous about what was going to happen next when they decided what to do. But it was totally metagaming. Like, none of those characters should have been interfacing that way. And there's something similar going on with Alien. A lot of the dread, the buildup, the tension comes from already knowing that there's an alien involved. And, like, you can pretend as much as you want that you don't know that an alien is involved or the mechanics of how aliens kind of propagate. But, like, on some level, like, and it is kind of fun to pretend that you don't know. But, like, there's two aspects to their actions that they're choosing to do. They're doing stuff that, like, makes it seem like they're ignorant of the situation while also pretending like they don't know what's going to happen. It's just a strange dynamic because they know what's going to happen, but they're terrified of it because those movies are scary.
Dude, seriously, like, I think even not having watched any of the Alien movies, right? The creature design of the Xenomorph, you look at it and you're like, I feel a certain way about this, and it just kind of imprints in you. And it's unlike any other creature. Like, the other day I was actually thinking about it because I knew we were going to be doing this episode, and I was like, man, like, I remember the experience of, like, watching Aliens and, walking back from my friend's house in Nutley, and it's a block. And I remember thinking, like, they could come from the trees. They could pop out of that manhole. They could come from anywhere. And I was like, I'm walking a little faster home. Like, in the end of the day, if it's a slow moving zombie, I can get away from it. If it's a serial killer like a Michael Myers or a Jason, I will at least try to fight back and die with my boots on. If it's a Xenomorph, I'm just going to crap my pants. I'm going to lay down and just let it do what it's going to do because I know there's really no hope here. Because, even if I, like, stab it, it's going to splash me with acid. Like, and it's only going to get madder and I'm going to die even more horribly. So I'm just going to close my eyes and just let it happen and, let the Xenomorph just, I don't know, put another Xenomorph inside me and, like, chew my flesh. But one of the things that I think really would make this game hard is most people, and I know it sounds like a little bit of a broad generalization, but most people who are going to come to play a game like this in the RPG hobby have seen some version of an Alien movie, whether it's Alien, Aliens, whether it's like the reboot like Prometheus, whether it's Alien versus Predator, what is going to happen. And, like, in Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs where whether you're new to it or whether you're a veteran, there's always that monster that you might not know about, right? And you can't metagame with because you've not encountered it yet because there are literally hundreds of monsters across the games, right?
Yeah.
With the Xenomorph, yes, there are variations on the theme, but a Xenomorph is a Xenomorph is a Xenomorph, and they're all deadly. Like, I'm gonna use the F word this time. Even a fucking pug Xenomorph, which is horrifying for me to think about, will kill you until you die from it.
And mechanically, that's really what happens when the players stand a chance against just about anything else that they cross paths with. When an alien shows up and really engages the way an alien's supposed to, it tears right through the party. And it's great because you want that to happen. Like, you want your characters to die. You want them to move to taking over NPCs. Like, you want that cost of interaction to be really high when the alien shows up because they do know it and they also expect it. So you need to deliver on that expectation.
I mean, absolutely. And, like, let's face it, the Xenomorph is so horrific. I use my one yearly F-bomb.
Cool thing about it, though, is that mechanically, I'm sort of intuiting this from the rules, but, like, the Xenomorph's different attacks are on a random table. So I intuited that to mean that I'm not supposed to strategize for the alien.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I was rolling its attacks randomly. and it was brutalizing them. But like they have non-lethal, like fear-based attacks that like give the players like it makes them more panic, but it also does it like, inflict harm on them. There is a little bit of like room to like survive, to like have a close encounter and come out of it intact. But the xenomorph has like multiple attacks that just kill you outright if it lands them. And yeah.
Well, I mean, this is the kind of game, though, where a psychological attack, albeit is not doing physical damage to the player, it could actually make the situation worse than physical damage, right?
Absolutely. So the way the panic mechanic works, you get stress dice when you push rolls or if bad things happen, and you have to roll them in addition to your regular pool of skill dice. So it gives you a better chance of succeeding because like, you're amped on adrenaline. But if you roll a 1 on any of those, you get a panic effect, and that panic effect supersedes your chosen action. So like you might be wanting to shoot the monster, but your panic effect makes you drop your gun. That sucks. And even if you're not really into Alien and the whole aesthetic of it, I think the amount that the game asks you to roll and the way that the stress to panic mechanic works naturally introduces like a really kind of lovely level of tension in everything that you're doing. People think that it's easy to roll 1-6 when you're rolling 12 dice, but I've seen it happen multiple times where they fail. You roll 12 dice, not a single success, and that means you got to push your roll, which means you got to take stress, and it's just like you're constantly upping the ante. It's very blackjack like, and no matter what your plan is, it puts that plan in jeopardy, and everybody around the table knows that. No matter how much you can kind of like, you could use the command skill to like get a bonus, you could help the guy who's doing the task to get a bonus die, you could try and rig it as much as possible, but like it is really the way that the game harnesses the randomness and punishes you with the randomness. It really does a great job of balancing like the best laid plans of mice and men,
So speaking of best laid plans, let's talk about the different groups. Why don't you tell our listeners how the Clubhouse crew fared in Chariot of the Gods?
Poorly. I don't want to give away too much of the story because I think it's really great. The other really key part of the game is that you, at least these cinematic scenarios, is that you get the personal agendas. These are short. They're a card that has like a sentence or two about what your character's all about. Everybody in both groups was really warmly receptive of that. Just that little push for role playing. It's like giving an actor like improv notes, like this is what you're going to do. It focuses play in a way that was really, really interesting. The Clubhouse crew, like we had Dave and we had Josh, who I don't think of as role players really with a lot of tabletop role-playing game experience. They really picked up on it. And our friend Sean, who has a lot of, has been playing as long as I have, really, really loved that little bit of direction. It's just a hint, but it really informed all of his decisions as a player. And of course, all of those personal agendas are pretty much at odds with each other. They're secret, so nobody knows what everybody else is doing. And there's a couple surprise twists in there that I really don't want to talk about because they are so good. They work so well. Dave's character died 3 times.
That's no small feat.
Yeah, no, his main character, like the one that you're supposed to play, got grabbed by a monster who cracked his head like a watermelon. Then he wound up taking over an NPC who didn't last all that long. And then he took another NPC who is directly at odds with the rest of the group. And yeah, at the end was a confrontation that involved monsters and people. Like the players were really fighting each other. It was great. It was a really sad kind of like melancholy ending where the one really lovable character did make it out, which was sort of like the one you were pulling for that I was pulling. I was the audience of one, but like, I was like, oh, I hope that guy survives. And he did. And I was just like, how'd that happen? That shouldn't have happened.
By the grace of God and Gygax.
Yeah.
I will say this. Our friend Sean is one of our favorite people to roll dice with. We've been playing games with Sean forever, Stu longer than I. Sean is not one who generally likes to pick up new systems. Like he's a D&D guy through and through. And then you have our friend Dave who sat in on a couple sessions of D&D, but it really wasn't his thing. And Josh is cool because Josh has been playing D&D with me every Wednesday night and trying out different systems over the whole course of the pandemic. So you have 3 or 4 different levels of, commitment to RPGs and different RPG styles coming together. And every single person that I talked to who was in that game were gushing about how awesome of a time they had. So I think that really speaks volumes to the system and your skill as a game master because everyone had a blast. Now, with that being said, the people who I haven't gotten feedback from, why don't you tell our listeners about how the Unwinnable group fared?
The Unwinnable group fared a little differently. They had a different interpretation of their personal agendas, which I think is a valid one. It just wasn't the one that I was expecting, especially since I had already finished the game with the Clubhouse crew. It went poorly again. They all managed to survive, but like the way that the scenario ended, it was just like, well, this is the end of the game. But like as soon as the credits roll, you don't know who is actually going to survive. You know what I mean? It's just like everybody's locked in that room and it's like, I think they might kill each other. But like it was kind of a nice note. We had a really brilliant moment. The main problem with the online game was that we got a pretty long delay in between before we played the last chapter. And that kind of like that fouled up the energy of it. It still worked pretty well, but like this really would have benefited from being like closer in proximity to the sessions. But the previous session, we had this amazing moment where one of the characters, Sarah's character, was doing a spacewalk and was attacked. And there was a gun, and it was just the way the rolls kept happening. Like Sarah kept falling off, like their maglocks kept detaching. So like they were floating off into space. The gun was floating off into space. They would grab the gun. They would like try to shoot, but then they'd panic and drop the gun. So it would start spinning off into space again. It was just like this crazy slow motion, like long drawn out, like terrifying fight. And when it finally ends, it ended with a bullet through the head. And it was just like, whoa, like everybody was just like, that was intense.
So wait, what do you mean? A bullet through their head or the alien's head?
A bullet through the monster's head.
Oh my God, that's like $1 million sequence in a movie.
It was one of those things where like the bullet went through and it like dropped. So like it was all this tension that it immediate release. It was a really cinematic moment.
So they had to enjoy that.
Yeah. It's tension and release. So like, even though like everybody's still in the shit, everybody's just like, yes, we won one small thing. Yay.
And that really, to me, sums up the overall feel of the game. Like there's no actual we won, but it's relishing in the small victories.
Yeah. Like Cthulhu, everybody kind of knows that, you know, going into this, that they're going to end poorly. Like you have to embrace that. If you're going into this, like playing D&D, like where like you're going to win, you're the hero, you got superpowers or whatever, like don't play this. Like you are going to lose. If you embrace that, you're going to have a blast. But I think that if you don't do that, you're going to have a really bad time.
So that actually brings me to my final question before I'm going to ask you your final thought on it. And that is, I think you really hit the nail on the head, because normally there is that thing where you have the metagamers. You've got like the veterans of any kind of RPG going in there, and they are like an elite kill squad. Like nothing is going to stop them. Like nothing that the dungeon master, game master, keeper of secrets, chill master is going to be able to throw at them will be able to stop them. Do you think that is in any way possible in this game?
Absolutely 100% no.
Amazing.
You can't. Like a tough character has 5 hit points. Most characters have 2. Granted, we haven't played the Colonial Marines one. That might be a little bit different. There's armor that impacts that, but like,
so you get 7 hit points.
Yeah, baseline. Well, no, armor doesn't even work like that. Your armor has a dice value, so like 2 or 4, and you get to roll 4 dice. And if you get a success, it blocks that many points of damage. So like, granted, aliens tend to do between 1 and 2 points of damage, so you could weather that pretty okay. But like, still, no, the characters are way too fragile. Nothing about the mechanics of the game play in your favor, like tactically or strategically. Like everything is sort of designed to exploit your fragility.
I love it.
This game is going to kill you just because most of your characters aren't going to be 5 hit points. I think out of the group of pre-generated ones for Chariot of the Gods, I think only one character has 5. Everybody else is like 3 or 2. Even if like everybody's like in that tactical mindset, like we are going to win, you've got one strong link in a chain of weak links, you know?
Always going to be a Pyrrhic victory.
Yep.
So Stu, do you have any final thoughts on this Post-Mortem?
I really think that everybody who likes role-playing games, that likes Alien and is open to new experiences, because you have to be open to new experiences. If you're coming from D&D, you know, you can't expect D&D. But if you check those boxes and you want something new, I really do think that everybody should try Chariot of the Gods and the Alien Starter Set. It will change the way you think about role-playing games. It bums me out that I don't have personal agenda cards for every character ever. There's so many mechanical things in there that I wish I could just apply to everything that I play going forward. It's just the quality of the play is just, it's so sparklingly good, and it does exactly what you want it to do. And if everybody goes in expecting the right thing, everybody at that table is going to have one of the best experiences of their role-playing careers.
Well, that is awesome. And this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I've already posted about most of the Alien line as it stands, but there'll be other stuff coming out next year probably. So, follow me and wait patiently for that.
Hell yeah. You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I'm posting and tweeting more because I'm like leaving the house and doing stuff. You could also check out my RPG 3-2-1 Action presents Rocket to Russia now on Exalted Funeral. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, think about becoming a patron. Patreon.com/vintagerepg. We've got early release episodes. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points, and we've got a behind-the-scenes look at my RPG 3-2-1 Action, as well as early release episodes and a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerepg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.